ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into Part 8 of the series. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. A few days passes as Izuku continued his internship with Fat Gum and Sun Eater. Any day the hero gave Izuku off was spent with Toru and his friends. It was more often to see Izuku with Toru at his side than not. While away, Mina teased Toru for missing her other half. On one particular day off on the weekend, Izuku and Toru went out into the city to enjoy themselves. It was a spontaneous choice by Toru. Izuku barely had any time to get changed before she dragged him out of his room with a couple of things he quickly grabbed. She seemed excited to go, and Izuku couldn't keep his smile off his face as she led him out of the gates. The first stop was at a small shop that sold pastries that caught her attention. He paid for both of them, with Toru's protesting at his arm. He managed to put her at ease when he proposed she pay the next time they visited the shop. She agreed grudgingly, but still smiled up at him. From there, they went to a small mall to wander around and window shop while talking about school, her parents, his internship, and many more mundane things. When they neared a small park, Toru pulled him to a bench under a tree's shade. "You know that secret move I've been keeping you from seeing?" Toru asked eagerly and somewhat shyly. Izuku smiled softly at her and nodded. "Yeah, are you finally going to tell me what it is?" She took in a large breath and nodded. "I am." Izuku watched with his eyes instead of his senses as a shimmering outline covered her skin. Slowly, Izuku could see her. She had pale skin with yellowish-green eyes and hair very similar to her mother. She had a beaming smile as Izuku's breath was taken away. He could only take in every detail of her visible face for a long moment. "I've only practiced by looking at my hands. I wanted you to be the first to see me," she said with a visible flush creeping into her cheeks. "What do you think?" she asked more shyly. Izuku could only grab her face and smiled brilliantly at her. "You're appealing." Her face flushed red at his words, and her eyes watered a bit. "And if I wasn't?" she asked jokingly. "I still would have said so." He chuckled and kept taking in every detail of her. "You still haven't seen yourself." Izuku quickly took out his phone, but Toru snatched it away and held it an arm's length away before taking a picture with the both of them in it. She flipped the phone around to see herself and took in a wobbly breath as she also took in every detail of her face. Her concentration failed, and she was invisible again, but that didn't stop Toru from turning to Izuku and giving him a bone-cracking hug. He took the impact from her, nearly knocking him over, and hugged her in return. "Thank you," Toru said into his chest. "For what?" he asked, confused, still holding her. "You were the one who gave me the idea that my quirk wasn't just invisibility, but light refraction," she said, pulling away but still holding his hands. He shook his head with a soft smile. "It was only a matter of time until you figured it out yourself." They spent their time at the bench close to each other until it began to darken. Izuku and Toru walked with their arms hooked the whole way back to the campus. They returned just in time for dinner and sat with their friends for a meal before bed. Mina teased the details of their time outside the wall of the school. Everyone went to bed with Toru sneaking into Izuku's room once again. The two fell asleep soundly in each other's arms. Monday, Izuku was called by Fat Gum to meet him at a different location than the agency in his school uniform. He found that odd, but followed instructions. He bumped into Tsu and Uraraka on their way to their internships as well and rode together to their destination. "Isn't Ryukyu's agency in a different area?" Izuku asked the two girls. Uraraka nodded. "It is. She asked us to go to a different location today." Tsu pulled her phone out and showed the address. Izuku looked at it with furrowed brows and showed the girls his messages with Fat Gum and the same address. "Hold on." The teen looked up the address to see if it was anywhere important and saw it was the location of the Nitai agency. Izuku's frown deepens. "It's All Might's old sidekick's agency." Tsuyu croaked softly and looked curious. "Any ideas why?" Izuku shook his head. "Not that I know of." They rode in silence the rest of the way and walked together to the building marked on the map. Izuku went in first to state his paranoia and immediately saw by Fat Gum. Izuku opened the door completely for the others to walk in with him. The big hero turned to his intern and smiled brilliantly at him. Flux, good to see you again. And you brought friends. He looked at the two girls behind him and knelt to whisper into Izuku's ear. You can't just take your girlfriend with you to work. He looked over his head at the two girls. Which one is it? Or is it both? He looked at Izuku with wide eyes. Izuku, used to the hero's antics, pushed the man's face, which was almost touching his own, away and shook his head with a slight blush. She's back at the school. We're here with Ryukyu, Uraraka said with a slight blush of her own from overhearing the hero. The frog girl was croaking a small laugh at the friendly hero's behavior beside Uraraka. Why didn't you just say so? He stood with a smile and motioned them to the doors behind him. Here, have some. He offered a plate of food to the three. Izuku took a bite to appease the hero, and the two girls followed his lead. They walked into a large room with many heroes scattered around talking softly with each other. Uraraka and Tsu walked over to Ryukyu and Nijire standing to the side after waving at Izuku. He gave them a nod and joined Fat Gum and Tamaki next to the table with food. He observed everyone in the room and brought up their profiles in his mind. There were many lower-ranked heroes, with Fat Gum and Ryukyu being the highest overall. Finally, he turned to the hero he is working under. What's all this about? Izuku asked. You'll see, the hero said with another plate of food before him. Izuku didn't have to wait long as Sir Night-Eye opened the door with Mirio behind him and Aizawa at his side with a short old hero with a white and yellow costume on. Izuku was incredibly interested in the old man since Izuku didn't recognize him whatsoever. The old hero locked eyes with Izuku, and he raised an eyebrow at the young man's intense observation. When he was done taking in everything he could from what he could glean, he turned to Mirio, who looked less chipper than usual and had bags under his eyes. Izuku ignored the stare of his homeroom teacher and focused on Sir Night-Eye. Good, you are all here. We may begin. Sir motioned to the large meeting room behind him. Everyone filed into the room and found their seats. Sir explained why he asked for all of them to meet together. I've been investigating a Yakuza clan named the Shai Hasaikai for quite a while. They are a large manufacturer of trigger, a drag that amplifies a person's quirk over a short time. The reason I called you all here today was because of what we have found about the Shai Hasaikai. A week ago, Fat Gum's interns, Flux and Sun Eater, encounter a thug with a unique drag that he attempted to shoot at them. Thankfully, neither were exposed to it. But the lab found out about the fluid. Its main ingredient is human BLD. There were many looks of disgust and confusion. What does this new drag do? Rocklock asked. Sir took in a long breath and said, it damages the quirk factor of the person exposed to the drag. There was an uproar of horror at the hearing there was such a drag. Izuku's mind spun up idea after idea on where that drag could be useful. His immediate thought was to use it on every prisoner in Tartaru and get rid of every threat that is wasting money just containing them. His mind came back to the thought of whose BLD was in it. Do we know whose BLD is in the drag? Izuku asked out loud for everyone to hear. All eyes turned to him and nodded in agreement with the question and turned to Sir. He pushed up his glasses and then spoke. We believe it belongs to Eri, supposed daughter of Overhaul, head of the Shai Hasaikai clan. The screen flipped to a picture of a girl of 5 with a hospital gown and bandages covering her arms and legs. A child? How dare they? Fat Gum roared in fury. Many other heroes joined in the uproar. Izuku's BLD boiled at the idea of Eri being used like a BLD bag. He looked up at the screen again and only saw desperation and fear about her future. He noticed Mirio flinch when Sir mentioned Eri. Izuku continued to stare at the upperclassman until he looked up to lock gazes with the absorber. Izuku could see the evident shame as the blonde looked down. Izuku absorbed the sound of the room until everyone looked around and saw his raised hand. He stopped his quirk when he got little sound energy and asked Sir, we are here to plan a raid on the compound and stop their manufacturing of trigger and this new drag, right? Why not save Eri and stop the production of the quirk erasing drag when there was a chance? Izuku's eyes snapped to Mirio, who looked even more ashamed at the moment. Why are children here? This is no place for them. Rocklock stated, looking between Izuku, Uraraka, and Tsu. Izuku ignored this since he knew Rocklock's profile and his proclivities about the safety of children. Instead, his eyes kept locked onto Sir's, waiting for an answer. The hero stared back at Izuku's eyes. If we took that chance, the Shai Hasaikai would have gone underground to continue their production of Trigger. We could not have risked that chance. Izuku spoke immediately after. Trigger will always be manufactured by others, but this new drag could be stopped completely since the child's BLD is the main ingredient. I doubt they are taking the BLD humanely with the clear terror on her face. He pointed at the screen, another flinch from Mirio. The risk was too great if we were to take the child. Sir shook his head again. Fat Gum stood up next to Izuku. We're here to plan a raid. The sooner that child is safe, the better. He said, anger lacing his words. Izuku sat down with Fat Gum, both their emotions boiling with the same thoughts going through their heads about Eri's suffering in that compound. They continued with the raid planning and learning about the 8 bullets and their profiles. Izuku paid close attention to everything he was shown. When they finished, the heroes dispersed to their agencies and the students gathered up downstairs. Izuku was still seething at having to wait for the raid to help Eri. They had little to no information about her, and Izuku wanted to interrogate Mirio about why he looked so ill every time Eri was brought up. Why did you react the way you did every time Eri was brought up? Izuku stared at Mirio. Everyone's eyes turned to him. On my patrol, Eri ran into me. She was trying to run away from Overhaul. He said with his eyes downcast. You let her go. Izuku seethed. What was I supposed to do? Mirio yelled out. With your speed, get Eri to safety and take out the head of the Shai Hasaikai. Izuku yelled back in fury. From what I've seen, you are a nightmare to any physical fights. No one can touch you if you don't want them to, and there are no obstacles for you. He finished with a hiss and glare. That's enough. Aizawa said loudly and used his quirk on everyone. Once everyone stopped and sat down again, he turned on Izuku. I'm tempted not to allow you to participate. For what reason? Your personal feeling. That's not very logical of you. I have not broken one rule of yours or Yue's. He said calmly and stared into Eraserhead's eyes. You have towed the line for a long time, and this doesn't include what you did to Muscular. He glared at his student. It was that or a dead child. I would have chosen it again, and I will if I have to with Overhaul. He said coldly as he stood up to meet his glare. What happened to Muscular? Uraraka asked, looking between Izuku and her teacher. I tried to get Kota to safety during the camp, and Muscular caught up with us. We fought, and he ended up between me and Kota. Anything I used on him might have hit Kota, and he was too close to intercept from killing Kota. So I absorbed his electric energy, and he ended up brain dead. Everyone seated gasped in horror. I would do it again if it meant Kota's safety. He turned his glare at Mirio, who looked sick at everything he had said. This is not helping your case, Aizawa said. Doing what's necessary to save Eri isn't helping my case. Izuku spat back. I do not trust you in this operation or any other. And I don't trust Yue to keep us safe. Don't. Aizawa's glare sharpened. The two continued to glare at each other until Tsuyu spoke up. Midoriya is right. He has only done the right thing every time he needed. If it was between my younger siblings or that villain, I would have been all right with what he chose. Uraraka looked uneasy but nodded with her friend. I'll be participating in that raid, Izuku said with finality. One way or another. He pushed past Aizawa and out of the front doors to leave. He walked to the train station alone and thought of what he had learned that day. What he mainly thought about was Mirio, and what kind person would let Eri go into Overhaul's hands to make things easier later on. His opinion on Sir was also lowered when he continued to have it his way only. When he met him over a year ago, he knew he was ridged, but not to the point where it was only one option. Then he thought of Aizawa and Yue. He wants to continue his studies and graduate Yue, but their attitude towards him is making it difficult to stay. The biggest reason he is staying is because of Toru and his friends. He knows it's not completely safe at Yue, but with the League of Villains still around. Where is? Izuku returned to the dorms ahead of the others he left with. It was close to dark when he opened the doors to the common room where most of his classmates were. He had calmed down for the most part, but his thoughts kept going back to earlier that day, and most importantly, Eri. He greeted his friends when they waved to him, but his tight smile was a dead giveaway to his emotions. Toru pulled Izuku to the open sofa, and he sighed as he sat down. Sorry, just learned some things during the internship that bothered me a lot. He said, looking down. And I don't think I'm allowed to tell you guys, not until it's past. Everyone nodded their heads and knew what their leader meant. They all had learned in school that sometimes there would be things they wouldn't be able to tell each other or loved ones due to security. Toru hooked their arms together and leaned on him. The other began to talk to him about what he had missed while he was gone. It wasn't much, but Izuku was grateful for their efforts. A few days passed with Izuku gritting his teeth with each day that passed with Eri still getting hurt in the Shai Hassaikai compound. He went to his patrol with Fat Gum every day. But Izuku could tell the hero was getting close to exploding due to the wait for the raid. Sun Eater looked more depressed than usual, and it was clear to see it was due to Mirio being down from guilt. How much trouble would we be in if we raided the compound ourselves? Izuku asked one day out of the blue to Fat Gum. He looked surprised at the question and shook his head reluctantly with a small smile. As tempted as I am to say let's do it and charge in there. We would risk the chance of letting many of them get away and then regroup somewhere else. That's not to mention, we would need to find Eri with everyone against us. Izuku was quiet for a moment and then asked, "What if we just wait for Eri to leave the compound, and we snatch her up, and I turn the compound to slag?" He said darkly. Fat Gum froze, and so did Tamaki. They both turned to stare at Izuku. Tamaki remembered what his underclassman revealed about his fight with Muscular and how it ended. The shy student wasn't so sure if Izuku was joking or not. Fat Gum was similarly thinking of what his file said about him and his previous, unstable nature. Heroes kill only when it's necessary, not when it's the easier solution. Fat Gum lectured softly and stared at his plate of food. Izuku only hummed non-committally to him and kept eating his snack. It was a sunny day when the raid was to start. Izuku stared at the compound through the screen as he waited with Fat Gum, who was also anxious to start already. Tamaki had already eaten what he needed for his quirk and stared with the same anxious energy as Fat Gum. They had been briefed already about every important member of the Shai Hassaikai, including the 2 members of the League of Villains that joined for a reason the heroes weren't sure of yet. The police gave their go-ahead and the operation started with a knock on the door. It burst open with the help of one of the members of the 8 Bullets. Flux jumps up with kinetic energy and absorbed the impact of one of the police officers who were launched back from Rakia. He landed softly, and Eraserhead caught the other one before he was injured. Ryukyu transformed into her dragon form and fought head-on with the Yakuza lieutenant. Everyone else was ordered to rush in through the busted open entrance and proceed with the operation. Flux ran alongside the others as they followed Sir Naitai to a dead end where it was revealed to be a secret door after a push of a button. More Yakuza members charged out, but they were dealt with quickly by Bubble Girl and Eraserhead. They were stopped again at a dead end at the end of the corridor they ran through after the staircase. Lemillion phased his head through the wall in front of them, and then pulled back and punched the wall to reveal the rest of the passageway. They soon stopped again, due to the room warping around. Izuku recognized Mimic's quirk and was beginning to grow frustrated at the idea of losing Eri and letting Overhaul continue his experiments. Izuku reached out with his senses to see if he could find where Mimic was hiding. "Flux, what are you doing?" Eraserhead all but growled at his student for walking off. The room began to violently move around to stop Flux when he got closer to a wall. He jumped up and dug his fingers into the wall with the help of thermal energy, melting a handhold. A kinetic shockwave shattered the thin wall and revealed Mimic's shocked face. He tried to sink in deeper to run away from Flux's angry eyes, but he was frozen when Eraserhead erased his quirk. Flux quickly shattered the stone around Mimic's body and zapped him until he was unconscious. He tossed the limp body down to Fat Gum, and he handcuffed him with quirk suppression cuffs. "Great job, Flux." Fat Gum praised his in turn. "Now, let's move on before they get away." Everyone nodded, and they made their way down the corridors. Tamaki split off to stop 3 other members of the 8 Bullets, and Flux assisted him by shooting a lightning bolt at the biggest of the 3, who Flux thought would give Sun Eater the most trouble. The rest of the group ran along with a few petty clan members trying to stop or slow them down. Fat Gum was pushed to the side when 2 of the 8 Bullets stepped in. Izuku's eyes lit up at the opportunity before him. "Fat Gum, I can take them. You think you're a match for me? Let's see then." Kendo roared and punched the short teen multiple times with his quirk. Izuku took each punch and absorbed the energy with an eager smile that chilled most people who saw it. "I'm not leaving a new intern alone here. Go on, we've got it here," Fat Gum said, and stepped next to Izuku. The rest of the raid ran ahead, while Izuku stared at Kendo and the man with a gray robe behind him. Flux stepped forward after throwing his jacket to the side. Kendo took this in stride and threw a barrage of punches at the smaller teen. Each impact was negated and absorbed into his core. He continued to step forward while accepting each punch. Now this is a good challenge. Kendo roared in joy. Hakiji Tengai was wary of the young hero whose face didn't change. Something is wrong, get back. His shield was covering the two of them. Izuku's smile only grew wider at the energy before him. He placed his palm against the yellow dome, stopping him from getting past to save Eri. He started slowly by taking a small amount of the shield before him. Under his hand, the bright yellow dimmed in its light. The man who conjured the dome looked in horror as the dome began to dim more and more. He poured more of his energy into reinforcing the dome, but he felt shivers at the smile hidden behind his mask of the boy who took it all in. Mine, Flux said gleefully and yanked all the energy Tengai had. The Yakuza man collapsed to the ground, shocking Kendo. What did you do? He asked, stepping away slightly at the unknown. Fat Gum also wanted to know himself. I think I caused him to go into Quirk exhaustion from taking all the energy he produces at once, Izuku said, interested in the outcome, and then played with his new energy by shaping a globe of yellow energy in his hand. Magnificent, he whispered to himself as he studied the energy, then locked eyes with Kendo, who looked unsure for the first time in a long time. How many of your punch can you take? All of them. Kendo tried to rile himself up again. He charged forward and continued his barrage of punches. Fight me. The next punch that landed felt wrong, and the next thing he knew was that he was across the room and his arm was shattered. You took about 70 of your punches, Flux stated as he walked up to Kendo's prone form. Do you yield? Kendo groaned in agony as he clutched his arm. He looked up to meet eyes with the forest green eyes that stared down at him. I was never a challenge, was I? No. You were a source of energy like your comrade over there, Flux said coldly and handcuffed his legs to save him from suffering the pain of moving his arm. Fat Gum stared at his in turn and approached him. You weren't joking about turning this whole compound into slag, were you? I have a lot of thermal energy, Izuku said by explanation. Let's catch up, he said as he heard a rumble from ahead. Flux and Fat Gum walked into a large room in full battle. Eraserhead was drunkenly fighting against someone with an alcohol bottle in hand, while trying to keep Overhaul from using his quirk. Lemillion fought against Overhaul, but he was handicapped by trying to protect Sir, who was bleeding profusely to the side. Another man was running off with Eri in hand while keeping an eye on the battle. I'm getting Eri, Flux said and blasted off to cut them off. Fat Gum cursed and ran to help Eraserhead so he could focus more properly on Overhaul. Flux flew above the battle between Overhaul and Lemillion. The Yakuza head saw where he was going and was able to use his quirk to erect a wall of spikes to impale him in midair. A wave of sound energy that rattled everyone shattered the stone spikes, and a blast of kinetic caused the debris to open a path for Flux. He heard Overhaul roar in anger, but his focus was on Eri's scared wide eyes. Chronostasis turned around with a gun in hand at the sound of his leader roaring in anger. He saw why Overhaul was enraged, and he was headed straight for him. He aimed the quirk-erasing loaded gun at the student and fired once, thinking it would be enough. He landed before him and the girl in his arm and held where he was shot. The member of the 8 bullets smirked, but his smile fell away when the green-haired boy pulled the intact syringe and examined it before his eyes snapped to him. He put it away, and then the void encompasses everything around him. He wasn't able to hear or see, and his only saving grace was that his legs were already spread out and balanced. He tried to look around, but he saw nothing. He felt the girl struggle to get away from his tight grip, but he gripped tighter in growing panic. Flux dashed forward under the waving gun and to Chronostasis's side. He gripped the gun, and a quick application of thermal energy caused it to turn to slag with his pointer finger still in the guard. He quickly went around to his other side and pulled Eri from his loosened grip due to his instinct to clutch at his incinerated finger. With Eri in hand, Flux kicked Chronostasis in the back with a kinetic blast and launched him toward the battle of Overhaul and Lemillion. He dropped the void domain when he felt Eri begin to breathe in rapidly in panic and not knowing what was going on. Izuku pulled off his gas mask and set Eri down in front of him. It's okay, he said softly to calm her down. We're here to get you to safety and away from them. I'm Izuku. You're safe, I promise. Eri's breathing steadied, and then she began to understand what he was saying. She began to cry at his words, and then began to panic again when her quirk began to lash out at the emotions she was feeling. She tried to push away from Izuku. "No, get away. You'll disappear." Her horn flared up in a golden light. Izuku sensed the new energy before him. Instead of what he did earlier with the villain and yanking all the energy to him, he slowly began to take it in to negate its effects. "No, it won't. It can't hurt me." "See," Izuku said with a smile, and raised his hand as the golden energy was seeked into his palm. Eri stared transfixed at the energy getting pulled into Izuku's hand, and then looked back at him. He wasn't disappearing as everyone else did. "Just calm down, all right? And try to close off your quirk. Can you do that for me?" Eri shakily nodded and clenched her eyes shut and focused on stopping like she had done before. It took a moment, but Izuku's hand on her shoulder helped greatly. When she opened her eyes, Izuku was beaming proudly at her, and the energy was gone. "Please don't leave me," she asked desperately with more tearing erupting from her eyes. Izuku kept his smile, but was saddened inside at the desperation of her plea. "I won't. I'll stay by your side." She clutched at his arm, and then paled when she looked behind him. He also turned around to see Overhaul charging straight at them with a monstrosity of a body. He passed over Chronostasis's unconscious body and touched him and assimilated him into the body that once was Overhaul. Lemillion was doing everything he could to stop him, but the limp arms looked wrong and his kicks were doing minimal damage to the monster. Izuku stood up and pulled Eri behind him. "Run!" Eri cried. Izuku looked down and smiled reassuringly. "It's okay. I told you you are safe." Izuku's smile fell as he turned to Overhaul, who was right not far from them. He raised his hand, and a bead of nuclear immolation coalesced in his palm. The fire that spilled out carved through Overhaul's chest and melted a large chunk of the wall behind him. The room heated up drastically, except for the area right around Eri. Overhaul stumbled and fell over before slapping one of his hands on himself and repairing the hole that should have been his spine and heart. Before Overhaul could use his quirk on the ground to impale everything, a lightning bolt that would have made the god of lightning proud struck him in the head, and he collapsed once again without getting up or moving. Izuku kept watching the villain to make sure it wouldn't move again for another moment, and then lowered his hand. He quickly raised it again and shielded Eri when the roof collapsed with Ryukyu and Rikia tumbling down. The villain was almost the same size as the hero due to his quirk absorbing the stamina of everyone around him. Originally, his quirk was touch-based, but it had been enhanced due to the trigger he took earlier. Everyone could see Rikia continuously getting bigger as he wrestled with Ryukyu, and Izuku saw another opportunity before him. He sensed the energy just under his range, and he pulled it. He felt the third new energy settle into his core, and he was ecstatic at the possibilities that opened up before him. He began drawing Rikia's energy to himself. The villain was enjoying himself in the battle, but felt something wrong immediately. He began to shrink as his energy was seeked away. He whipped his head in the direction where it was headed, and he met eyes with a smirking green-haired boy. He didn't get a chance to fight him as he felt exhaustion settle in and darkness take him. Everyone underground watched as Rikia collapsed face down, trying to reach Izuku, who stood shielding Eri from anyone that got too close. The little girl, for her part, stared in awe as Izuku took out some of the strongest Yakuza leaders with little effort. Ryukyu looked confused at what happened before her, but quickly moved and placed quirk suppression cuffs on the man. Izuku knelt again at Eri's side and smiled. "Let's get you out of here." She nodded and was picked up by Izuku. She clung to him as they made their way closer to everyone else. Fat Gum looked slimmer, but still big as he ran up to his intern and Eri. She held tighter as the big hero approached more carefully as he got close. "Flux, glad to see you're all right." "Hello, Eri. You can call me Fat Gum." He smiled brilliantly at her. She nestled closer to Izuku and warily watched the hero. "He's okay. I worked with him to get you out." She turned at Izuku's voice and relaxed just a bit. Fat Gum nodded with a softer smile and guided them to the exit. Izuku held Eri tight as they passed through the corridors that were her waking nightmare. They slowed when they passed an open metal door with a child's bed inside. Izuku asked her if she'd like to grab anything, and she shook her head while covering her face in his jacket. They moved on. They reached the surface and the flurry of activity around them as clan members were being thrown into police vans with paramedics and firefighters at the ready to help where they were needed. They moved to the paramedics, and Izuku hesitated when he realized he would need to let Eri go. "Fat Gum, I'll be staying with Eri," he stated. The hero looked between Flux's set face and Eri's hands clutching to his jacket. "That would be, for the best. I'll meet you at the hospital later." Fat Gum nodded and moved to the ambulance to tell the men what was going to happen with Eri and Izuku. They boarded the back of the ambulance, and Eri reluctantly let herself get checked up by the gentle woman as they rode to the hospital. Izuku declined a checkup since he wasn't hurt in any way during the raid. His mind did go back to Sir Naitai and Lemillion, who were both injured. Sir was out of the fight from the beginning when Izuku arrived, and Lemillion looked like his arms were shattered for some reason. He was curious about his classmates, but he didn't see them in the brief walk to the ambulance. Izuku focused back on Eri on his lap as she held tight to him. He worried about what will happen to her if they decide to separate her from him, and she loses control of her quirk again without him being near. Eri looked up at Izuku's face, and he smiled reassuringly as they rode in relative silence. She leaned against his chest, and Izuku placed his arm around the child to comfort her as much as he could. Eri held tightly to Izuku as he walked into the hospital to have her looked over. Once she realized where they were going and who would be there, she began to sob. Izuku stopped walking and knelt in front of her with worry filling his face. "What's wrong?" "I don't want to see doctors, they hurt me," she sobbed and began to back away. "The doctors you've met aren't doctors. They are supposed to help and heal you, not hurt you. And if they ever try to hurt you, I'll stop them. How about that?" Eri looked unsure as she peeked behind him to see further into the hospital, but then her eyes turned to his softly smiling face. "You promise?" "I do promise," he said, beaming at her. He held his arms out to pick her up, and she settled into them immediately. They caught up with the nurse that was skirting them to a room and continued their path to it. After a bit of walking, they stopped in front of a room, and the nurse opened the door for them. Izuku walked in carrying Eri and sat her down on the bed while he pulled up a chair close to her. Eri looked around the room with wariness. Seeing this, Izuku offered his hand for her to hold, and she did so instantly. Izuku stayed at her side the whole time as a few doctors came in to examine her for anything they could help with and heal. She began to get anxious at the doctor looking her over, and Izuku noticed her horn begin to glow softly. He raised his hand to stop the doctors from continuing and interposed himself to have Eri just see him. He began to absorb the wisps of energy that leaked off her horn and held her to his chest. "It's all ready. They aren't hurting you. If they did, I would make them disappear. You're safe," he continued to say as her breathing calmed down and her horn stopped glowing. Maybe it would be for the best for one doctor at a time. He looked over his shoulder at the three that were looking her over. The three looked at each other and nodded. That probably would be for the best. The one on the right said, and stayed as the other two left. Izuku stayed with Eri on the bed as the doctor who stayed looked her over and cleaned her up. They replaced the bandages on her limbs and got her a new gown that wasn't stained. Eri had her face in Izuku's chest as they removed the bandages, and he stroked her hair to distract her. Soon the doctor was done, and Eri lay under the bed sheets and was dozing off. Izuku had gotten off the bed and was in her line of sight. "Izuku?" Eri asked. He turned to her. "Yeah, Eri? What's going to happen to me?" She pulled the sheets closer to her face and asked tentatively. Izuku paused and thought about it. "I'm not entirely sure, but I will make sure you go to a good place." She was quiet for a long moment. "Can I stay with you?" she asked hopefully. Izuku froze and thought about the logistics of doing such a thing as taking care of a young child while at school. "I'm not sure, but I will try and ask." He did think of the benefits of Eri staying with him due to her quirk and her attachment to Izuku. He could safely teach her how to control her quirk and with the benefit that she trusts him. He had to admit, he was beginning to grow attached to her as well. Eri nodded and slowly drifted off to sleep. Izuku stayed in his chair with his jacket hanging to the side. He pulled his phone out and messaged his friends about the situation and his condition. They sent a barrage of texts back, and he answered them all. He sat there in the room with Eri asleep thinking about Eri's request. He was unsure of watching over a child her age and being responsible for her, but he was sure he could help with her quirk. After all, he had studied quirks for all of his life, and he even her energy in his core to experiment safely before she tried something. Thinking of her energy, he analyzed it in his core with his other energies. It was a quirk energy like the explosive energy from the man on his internship. It was unique and mostly likely only obtained from the person's quirk. Not like thermal or light, which was everywhere. The new energy was oddly contained, unlike lightning which always wanted to escape and spread. Aries' quirk energy moved slowly inside his core as he felt at it. Slowly he brought his hand out and released a small amount of it. It escaped his hand and shimmered in the air before dissipating. To Izuku, it was pretty. He looked around the room and found a pen. He snatched it and used the energy on the writing tool, but nothing happened. He examined the pen to see if there were any differences, and he didn't find any. He tested its durability, its flexibility, and its ability to write. Izuku frowned, and then thought about how some quirks only work on biological objects and not inanimate ones, like healing quirks. He looked around again and found a plant on the windowsill. He went to it and used a drop of energy on it and watched it carefully. Nothing happened. He frowned again and felt at the plant. He threw his hands up in the air when he felt it was plastic. For the moment, he gave up on the experiment and sat down again. Just as he did, he sensed a large thermal signature open the door just a bit, and Izuku raised an eyebrow at the smiling face of his boss. Fat Gum waved for him to come, and Izuku got up to do so. He closed the door quietly behind him and looked up at the hero. "How's she doing?" he asked first. Izuku shrugged. "Alive, but not well mentally or physically. Malnutrition and multiple scars across her limbs," he said in one long and angry breath. Fat Gum's face screwed up in a snarl at the thought. They will rot in prison. Better off if they were dead. It's a waste of resources to keep them alive, Izuku said with a neutral tone. Fat Gum stared at him for a moment and then said, "We aren't judge, jury, and executioners. It is the job of heroes to stop the villain, and we did so." Izuku looked away and hummed noncommittally. He nodded at the statement and kept the rest of his thoughts to himself. He looked back to the hero and asked, "What of everyone else?" "Sir was unconscious when I last saw him, and Lemillion looked in bad shape too." Fat Gum went with the change of subject. "Sir Nightai had a severe concussion and deep lacerations on his body. The doc thinks he will be all right, but he is still unconscious. Lemillion's arms were completely shattered from his quirk. He will be all right after some time." Izuku frowned at Mirio's condition. How could Mirio's quirk cause him to break his arms like that? His quirk allows him to become intangible and, from what he understands, ejects him out when he is in space with another object. He couldn't have broken his arms to that degree from using his quirk wrong, and on top of that, he is one of the top 3. He had become masterfully skilled in using his quirk. How? How what? Fat Gum asked. How did he shatter his arms? Did you see it? It was odd. I saw a lightning arc around him, and then he punched Overhaul with incredible force when he merged with one of the others. It was like All Might through the punch, he said impressed. But afterward, his arm was purple and wrong. He did it again with his other arm soon after. Izuku hummed in thought and didn't say anything more. Unless his quirk evolved, Mirio shouldn't have been able to do such a thing as punch with the force of All Might. His mind went back to the fight between All Might and the villain with multiple quirks. "What is it?" Fat Gum asked with furrowed brows. Izuku shook his head. "Just a thought." He looked back at the door to Aries' room. "What's going to happen to her?" Fat Gum sighed. "We're not entirely sure just yet. Normally, we'd look for any living relatives to take her in. Next would be an orphanage if there aren't any viable people. But I get the feeling that it won't be that simple. Her quirk is volatile, and I'm not sure what it does just yet." He showed the contained energy in his hand. "She seems very wary of everyone, but me too." "What are you saying?" Izuku sighed and rubbed his scarred shoulder. "She asked me if she could stay with me, and I don't know what to do. I want to help her, but I don't know how to accomplish that. I could watch over her in case her quirk is out of her control, and she seems to trust me. What I'm trying to say is, can you help me?" he asked earnestly. Fat Gum smiled softly down at him and grabbed his shoulder to look at him. "I'll see what I can do. You seem attached to Eri already." Izuku smiled and looked away. "I can help her," he said simply. "Thanks, Fat Gum." He released Izuku and patted his hair. "Go get some rest for the time being." He quietly opened the door to Eri's room. Izuku nodded and went to his chair to sit down. He got comfortable and relaxed some while watching Eri shift in her bed. He decided to copy her and take a nap as well. It took a while, but he soon dozed off to sleep. He was awoken an hour later by the beeping of the machine attached to Eri to monitor her heart rate. The rapid rate of the noise sent Izuku into fighting mode right away. He looked at the little girl first and saw that she was breathing rapidly and backing away from nothing in particular, a nightmare. Izuku quickly went over to her and got in her line of vision before talking. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. You're safe, remember? He slowly got to her side to not scare her. Eri looked around frantically until her eyes landed on Izuku. She flinched when the door was thrown open by a nurse, but the woman slowed when she saw Izuku hovering over Eri. Nightmare? She asked softly. Izuku nodded, and she left quietly. His attention went back to Eri when he heard her start crying. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened his arm to give the option of some comfort. She looked at him for a moment and then hesitantly under one arm for a hug. Izuku gently lowered his arm and held her snugly against him. She slowly relaxed under his arm, and her crying came to a slow. After a long moment, Eri looked up at the one who protected her from overhaul. Izuku looked down at her when he caught her staring and smiled softly. Eri's eyes roamed around him until they stopped at his shoulder. You have scars, she stated. Izuku moved his free arm to show better. I do, he agreed. Did bad men do that too? She asked quietly. Izuku thought about that for a moment. Something like that. He nodded. They can't hurt me anymore. Eri nodded at that explanation. Eri, do you have any family? Mother, father? He asked slowly. Eri looked down in her head. My curse made Papa disappear, and Mama didn't want me anymore. She said with tears beginning to leak again. Curse? You don't have a curse. What you have is a quirk. Most everyone has one. Yours is just dangerous. But there are lots of different types of quirks. He stopped before going on to a lecture on quirks. We just have to help you control your quirk, and it won't be so dangerous. Quirk, she said softly. You have a quirk? I do, he said nodding. Want to see? Eri nodded curiously, and Izuku held out his hand. In the palm of his hand grew a ball of light. He shifted it to the void, and then each one to show her a light show. I can absorb energies and use them later. Your quirk uses some kind of energy, and I absorb to help you. He finished by showing a ball of her quirk energy. Eri's eyes watched in fascination at the display. Pretty. For the rest of the time, Izuku sat with Eri and let her play with the energy he produced. She swiped her fingers through the void energy and tried to grab the light ball that flicked to each finger. The most interesting one was one of the new energies he had gotten that day. He is calling it shield energy, since the main focus was to use it as a shield. When he projected the energy, it naturally shaped a sphere with a hollow interior. He was sure if he expanded the energy, it could cover his whole body. It was an added defensive move to the power set. Eri played with the energy like a ball. She held it gently in her hands, and then it disappeared in her hands and absorbed back into Izuku's skin. He reformed the ball, and she took it again. Sometime later, there was a knock at the door, and Mirio peeked inside. Izuku felt Eri tense at seeing who it was. She shivered just a bit, and Izuku held her close to him. Mirio stepped inside with a beaming smile. His arms were wrapped up in bandages, but healed. Tamaki and Nijire came in behind him. Izuku felt Eri's hand tighten around his hand, which she was playing with just a moment ago. He observed the three. They all seemed fine for the most part. They were healed up, but Izuku could see the tension in Mirio's shoulders. Hello? I'm happy to finally meet you. Mirio exclaimed just a bit too loud, which caused Eri to flinch. My name is Lemillion. You left me, Eri said with tears beginning to leak and her shaking intensifying. Mirio's smile broke, but he tried to hold it on his face. It reminded him of All Might on the rooftop so long ago. Mirio, I think it's best if you leave, Izuku said. His smile broke entirely, and he stepped forward to explain himself, and Eri flinched again. Izuku used his new shield energy to form a dome around the bed they were on. Mirio bumped into it and backed away. The shield was absorbed, and Izuku stared harshly at Mirio. Mirio finally nodded with his teeth clenched and turned to leave. Better work on that quirk of yours. It would work great with the one you were born with. In the end, Izuku's eyes sucked to Nijire as her shoulders tensed. Mirio whirled around again and stared at Izuku, but his face remained neutral. I'll see you later, Tamaki. He turned dismissively from Mirio and to the ever-quiet boy beside Mirio. The three looked at each other and had a wordless conversation before leaving with Mirio, giving one last look over his shoulder. Izuku watched them with his sixth sense, but his focus was on Eri, who was crying. He rocked her back and forward in an attempt to soothe her. Why? She sobbed. Izuku looked down at her. Why what? Why did he leave me? She asked softly. Because he thought it was the right thing to do, but it wasn't. He should have done more to try and help, but he let you go. Izuku said harshly, looking at the door. Eri was quiet for a long moment, and then asked, What would you do? Burn Overhaul into ash so he could hurt anyone else ever again, and then take you to safety? Izuku said immediately, his mind going back to Muscular and how he would never hurt anyone again, even if there would be another prison break. But killing is bad, Eri said. Izuku nodded. It is bad, but I'd rather do bad things to help good people. Eri took that in and stayed near Izuku's chest and the warmth he radiated. He formed another ball of energy and handed it to her. She took it and played around with it in her hands until she began to drift off to sleep again. Izuku stayed by her side for as long as he could. You promise you will come back? Eri asked with tears cropping her eyes. I will, but I'm sorry I have to go so soon. I have school, and they aren't letting me stay. I will be back to visit until the hospital decides to let you leave too, Izuku said while looking her in the eye to reassure her. He thought for a moment, and then he took off his jacket and placed it next to her. Hold on to this for me. After all, one way to make sure I come back is to come back for my jacket. He finished with a smile. Eri took the jacket in her small hands. She looked up and nodded with more reassurance. Okay. With that, Izuku patted her head gently and turned to leave out the door. It was the next day after the raid. Izuku had stayed the night in Eri's room like he had stayed in Turu's room when she recovered. The girl had a few nightmares during the night, and one quirk outburst that Izuku had taken care of easily. When Eri realized that she wasn't in Overhaul's lab anymore, she calmed down. Eraserhead came in before the sun had set to see Eri and his student. The two had spoken, while the little girl had looked warily at the unshaven man. Izuku told her he was a hero, and she calmed down, but she still stared at the underground hero. The two spoke about what Izuku wanted with Eri and what Niza thought about it. They were already thinking of taking Eri to UA before Izuku asked Fat Gum for his favor. Aizawa explained what they had planned and how he was going to be her main caretaker for the fact that he could erase her quirk. They added Izuku into the plan when Fat Gum spoke to Nizu about his favor. Niza decided it would be an added benefit to Eri's mental health to keep Izuku near her while she reigned in her quirk. It was even more beneficial when Izuku told them about him being able to absorb her quirk energy to negate it just as easily as Eraserhead. They still haven't told Eri about what was the plan going forward. Izuku traveled to the dorms with Tsu and Uraraka after they had been released the same morning. The two girls asked about Eri and how she was doing on the train ride. He told them readily about her well-being. Izuku had grown to trust the two over the school year with Tsu's blunt nature and Uraraka's earnest behavior. The friction between Izuku and Ida didn't affect her attitude towards Izuku, which he appreciated. When the three walked through the dorm's front doors, they were immediately greeted by the class who was in the common room. Izuku was mobbed by Toru and the others in the gang of friends. Great to see you again, Denki said with a beaming smile. Toru over here was checking her phone every 5 minutes. So much she missed you. Mina teased with a giggle as she looked him over. Toru ignored her in favor of burying her face in Izuku's chest while her arms were wrapped around him tightly. Izuku automatically did the same to her. The group moved to the common room. Izuku sat in the middle of them all as they waited for him to talk about what was going on. He did so and told them about how the raid went and the outcome. He told them about Eri and what he wanted for her. All of them realized quickly why he became attached to the child when they looked at their similarities. Izuku was abandoned because of his lack of a quirk, and Eri was abandoned because of her quirk. A quirk that he could help her with by the sounds of it. None of them brought up their thoughts, but listened attentively to him. He finished with a sigh after telling them why he stayed the night at the hospital. Denki was the one to speak first. That really SCKS, he said with a sigh. The others nodded along. Can we see her? Next time you go to visit? Toru asked. Izuku hummed in contemplating. I'm not sure that's a good idea right now. It might be overwhelming to meet new people so soon after what happened. Toru nodded dejectedly. That makes sense. They stayed quiet for a moment until Hanta asked with a curious smile. So, how many new energies did you get? Mina looked excitedly at Izuku after his question. Yeah, you mentioned something about getting new energy. Izuku was happy to show them his spoils of war. He started with the shield energy. A form of shield energy pretty strong and I can absorb what I use, so there is no loss. He created a small ball that grew to cover his hand. Denki tapped the orange energy. Cool, he gasped. Can you make a hamster ball with this and roll around with it? He asked with glee. Izuku paused and looked at everyone, and they looked back at him. While he did want to try it out, it seemed embarrassing to act like a child. Toru saw his trepidation and yanked him up and to the backyard. The others were on their heels with childish excitement. Izuku, with red cheeks, formed a ball of energy around himself just big enough to stand. Denki and Mina immediately pushed the sphere of orange energy, which led Izuku to fall inside the sphere as it moved. He absorbed the impact, but the two didn't stop. They kept pushing as Izuku tried to find a way to keep himself from getting tossed around the hamster ball. Hanta and Toru were laughing as Izuku cursed his two friends who kept pushing him around as they cackled in joy. He absorbed the energy surrounding him, which caused Denki and Mina to tumble forward and land on top of Izuku, who was disheveled by getting rolled around for a good few minutes. He groaned as Denki pushed himself off of Izuku and Mina off of Denki. They could only hear the howling laughter of Hanta and Toru, who watched on. After they had calmed down, they regrouped to see what else Izuku had to play around with. Not sure how strong it is, but the guy I took it from was pretty confident about it. How much did you take? Mina asked. Izuku felt around in his core, and it was hard to put it into a measurement. A lot. I made him go into quirk exhaustion by yanking it all at once. Everyone looked confused. Hanta was the one to voice the question on everyone's mind. How? It was a theory I had that if someone had an energy quirk and I pulled everything they had, either they would go into quirk exhaustion because of the quirk trying to push out everything at once, or I would kind of short out their quirk and they would need to start using it from the beginning again. Like a flame snuffed out, they would need to light it again after I blew it out. He rambled on into his thoughts while he rolled around a globe of shield energy in his hands. So if you yanked all my electricity out, then I would go into quirk exhaustion? See, Denki asked. Not sure about that. Electricity in the body is very delicate and yours shouldn't be any different. I'm not sure how separated your quirk electricity and your natural electricity is. Intertwined. If I yanked one, would the other come too? Like muscular. Oh right. That makes sense. Denki nodded with a grin expression. Enough of that, what else do you get? Mina broke the thick silence immediately. Izuku smiled and showed off the next energy. This is from a villain who was boosted by Trigger. His original quirk was a touch-based stamina drain that converted to strength. With Trigger, it became ranged and I was able to snag some of it, and now it's new base energy that I can absorb from others. He released some of the orange light energy from his hand. I haven't tested it out much, but I can sense the same energy in all of you guys and everyone inside too. Denki leaned forward and swiped his hand through the energy. He sat rigidly as he took some of the energy. Whoa, that's like 10 cups of coffee. He sat up fully alert. Denki, that could have been dangerous. Izuku admonished his friend, but looked on curiously as he saw the energy he released merge with the rest of his stamina. A boosting effect. He said to himself in thought. Let me try? Let me try. Mina asked eagerly. Izuku reluctantly let some leak out of his finger where Mina swiped her hand across. The same effect happened to her, and Mina sat up with a splitting grin. No more sleep. This is not a replacement for sleep. I'm not sure how it would affect you if you did. Izuku released some more stamina energy when Toru pinched his arm when she wanted to try it as well. He looked at her with narrowed eyes, but Toru's pouting face broke Izuku immediately at seeing it. And then this energy. Izuku said while holding it away from everyone in his palm. It radiated golden white light. For the brief moment, he released some of it. It's Aries quirk energy, but I don't know what it does. It doesn't affect non-organic material as far as I could tell, and I'm wary to try it on a person when she said it made people disappear. Let's find a plant. Mina bolted from her seat with boosted stamina still in her body. Yeah. Denki nodded eagerly. Hanta looked to Izuku. Never give them that stuff again. He said seriously. He looked at the three who absorbed some of the stamina energy and had to agree. Toru was vibrating in her seat while hugging Izuku's arm. Mina was running from one place to another looking for a plant, and Denki was shooting off sparks at a constant rate. He decided Denki had enough before he shocked someone by accident and pulled gently at his stamina until he was back to normal. It was evident when the effects wore down when his quirk eased up and he sat more relaxed. That was a rush. Denki said with a hand to his head. That'll be great to boost someone before fighting. Izuku nodded with him at the application and thought about what else he could use it for when Mina almost slammed a potted plant on the table they sat at in the backyard. Plant, Mina declared while hopping from foot to foot. The dwindling stamina Izuku gave her was taken away and she slumped. Ah, no fun. Toru pouted again when her excess stamina was drained as well. All right, just one drop of that energy. Izuku detached himself from Toru just in case and placed his hand over the plant. The golden white energy flowed out and touched the plant. Before everyone's eyes, it shrunk to a younger state of its life CYCL. Oh, Izuku could only say. Everyone stared at the plant that was at least a few weeks younger than it was just a moment ago. Time travel energy? Mina was the first to shout out. No. I don't want anything to do with time travel. That stuff freaks me out. Hanta put up his hands in surrender and backed away. That's so cool, Toru said, leaning forward to examine the plant. Izuku didn't listen to any of them as he was lost in his head while mumbling to himself about the applications of such an energy. Before he could lose himself any further, Denki zapped his arm. Ow. What? Izuku rubbed at the spot and Mach glared at Denki. For his part, the electric user smirked. Just making sure you didn't go comatose or something, he said with a shrug. I'll make you go comatose. Izuku mumbled back. He turned his attention back to the plant and hummed in thought. He sighed in frustration and rubbed his face at what he had thought. I have to tell Aizawa to make sure they know how dangerous Aries' quirk could be. More so to make sure there is enough security around her just in case. The other four moods dipped at that realization. If it was known that Aries' quirk could reverse time on a person, who knows who would try to snatch her up? Izuku had to admit having her come to UA would be the best, even though he didn't fully trust them. Since the beginning of the year, when he found Katsuki sitting at that desk in their classroom, he began to doubt UA's logic and reasoning. From there, the USJ happened with him ending up with a psychological evaluation because he decided to put a stop to the most dangerous villain in that building. Then the training camp happened with the League of Villains knowing where they were located. That alone screamed red flags in terms of security. He would have thought of going to another school like Ketsubutsu Academy or Shiketsu High School after that, but he couldn't leave the only people he thought of as friends in Toru. He even liked some of his other classmates, and leaving UA would mean he would be back to step one like the first day of UA. Any of you have his number? Izuku asked, looking at his friends. They shook their heads in the negative. With a mournful sigh, he got up from his seat in the backyard. I suppose I have to be social and ask other people. Toru giggled at his dramatics. Both Denki and Hanta nodded with a somber expression. Such a fate. A cruel fate. The two said. They chuckled and followed a grinning Izuku inside. The absorber stopped grinning when he saw the TV on the news station. The reporter was talking about how a police convoy was attacked and everyone was killed. They were transporting Overhaul to the Tartarus when ambushed by villains that left burnt bodies and ash. Yayaruzo, do you have Aizawa's phone number? Izuku asked the girl on the couch with some of his classmates. She looked oddly at him. You don't have it already? Why would I? Izuku asked, confused. Never mind here. She passed him her phone with Aizawa's number pulled up. He copied the number onto his and thanked her for her help. He went over to the backyard with the others staying behind to let him have some privacy. Izuku stared at the number on his phone for a bit, but in the end, he hit the call button with a scowl. It rang 3 times before someone picked up on the other end. Who is this? Aizawa's voice was monotone as he answered. Izuku Midoriya. I found out what Aries' quirk does, or at least the energy. He said with no preamble. It was quiet for a moment, but there was a quiet sigh and some rustling. Come to Gym Gamma. And then he hung up. Izuku scowled even further at his phone as the line was disconnected. With a huff of air, he peeked inside to tell his friends that he was headed to meet with their homeroom teacher. With that done, he went back inside and untied his shoes. In his bare feet, he walked a small distance away from the building and then blasted into the air with kinetic energy. He kept going for a long time until he could see all of UA and its surroundings. He just stopped and took it all in as he fell back to the earth. Between the sun setting on the horizon and the curvature of the earth, it was a breathtaking scene. He thought Toru might like it and snapped a picture and then sent it to her. He fell for a while until it became easier to see the sections of the UA grounds. He found Gym Gamma and reoriented himself to blast to the entrance. He sped up until he reached the ground. He extended his hand before ending up splattering on the ground and absorbing the impact to come to a stop. He got his feet underneath him and crouched down with his hands still on the ground. He stood up and didn't see anyone yet, so he sat down on the ground. He had a ball of the shield energy in hand and then began to experiment. First, he put the shield under enough pressure for it to break apart using kinetic energy from his hands on opposite sides of the ball. It shattered like glass and then dissipated into the air. He tried to absorb the energy of the shards, but he got little back. He nodded along with his theory being correct about losing energy if it breaks. Next, he made another ball of shield energy. This time he added different energies to see if the result would be any different, but none of them did. Quirk energy has always been too unique to mesh with other energies. Izuku finished his experiments by trying to contain thermal energy inside the ball to make a fire bomb of sorts, but it ended up breaking under the pressure of the contained heat. Finally, he sensed someone approaching and looked up to see Aizawa watching him as he got closer. Izuku stayed on the ground and stared back until he was a few feet away. Aizawa sighed and rubbed his face after staring at each other for so long. Why is it so hard for you to trust us? Because you haven't given me any reason to trust any of you. We are your teachers. My past teachers are all in jail. He cut him off from finishing. He didn't continue and got up to walk to the entrance of the gym. He heard Aizawa follow him with thinned lips before Izuku stopped in front of a tree. How old do you think this tree is? Aizawa furrowed his brow but gave out an answer. 30 years maybe? I'm not an arborist. Izuku let some of Aries' energy out of his hand and into the tree. It visibly shrunk, and the branches got closer to its trunk with the roots in the ground retracting. How about now? They stared at a much smaller tree, 10 years younger at least. He looked grim as he stared at the tree. Izuku stared at Aizawa to take him in. Does Eri have enough security at the hospital? I'll talk to Nizu and make sure she does. He locked eyes with Izuku. Thank you for telling me. I didn't have much of a choice, Izuku said, and then blasted off again into the air to head to the dorms. In the air, he slowly fell again and took in the view again. Then on a whim, he began to absorb thermal energy. There was nothing in the way as the area he fell through was devoid of any heat. When he landed in the backyard, the temperature of the area had dropped several degrees. He greeted Toru with a hug and his friends with a smile as he sat with them on the couch.